G'day all, Simon here, Explosive Action. It's Australia Day. I'm going to talk about Australian movies and Australian metal, all the ones that are my favourites. I've got my Bunnings hat on, I've got my tinnie and a Wolf Creek stubby holder. Get a dog up here. So I've picked 8 of my favourite Australian movies to quickly talk about here. When I say Australian movies, I mean they star Australians, they're in Australia, and they have an overall Australian feeling. So I don't mean The Matrix just because it was shot in Sydney. That's not what I'm talking about. The films have to feel Australian, and there's none more Australian really, to the international audience for sure, than the Mad Max series of films. Absolutely fantastic and groundbreaking post-apocalyptic action films. The first Mad Max from George Miller, who did all of the films, from 1979, with Mel Gibson, a very young Mel Gibson, being dubbed in the American version, which is absolutely appalling. So make sure you watch the actual original audio Australian version. But it's really interesting that the films are considered the post-apocalyptic genre templates, when really it's only from the second film onwards that the Italians would start ripping them off. From Road Warrior, the first Mad Max film, is more of a... You don't really know that it's post-nuke, you just know that society is collapsing. Until you get until you get to Fury Road, when it starts to dig into more of the mutations that have happened. These are excellent films. Beyond Thunderdome, the third one, maybe a little bit less good than the other ones, but Mad Max, Road Warrior, and Fury Road I love as well, so Mad Max. The next is a film I don't think gets talked about very often. This is a faux documentary called Lake Mungo, and it is definitely one of the most impressive fake documentaries I've ever seen. 2008 film, I believe. It is all about a 16-year-old girl who, as we learn through the documentary, has died, and it goes through the series of disturbances that led to the death. It interviews the parents, interviews the brother. It gets very supernatural. It involves a bit of found footage as well. It's very ghostly. I don't want to give too much away, but I think it's an incredibly well done and very believable film. So if you've not seen Lake Mungo, if you like fake documentaries, if you like found footage films, though keep in mind it's a mix of both. It is real, as if documentary style footage interjected with footage that was found on the scene to support as the evidence for the documentary. So yeah, Lake Mungo, definitely worth checking out, and a very Australian setting as well. Next up is a very, very Australian comedy film that pretty sure has had no international audience, so I don't expect anyone outside Australia to know what this film is. This is Crackerjack. This film stars Mick Molloy, who it still is an Australian stand-up comedian, but also a radio personality, a 90s TV personality. Very funny, very dry, very Australian character. In this film, he is a layabout, no-hoper kind of guy that is paying a lawn bowl green just to rent their car parking space. The lawn bowls, which is what a sport for very much the elderly people in Australia anyway, having a problem with membership. People keep dying because they're all old. He is called upon to do his civic duty and actually play a game. It all gets very funny with him trying to get out of playing these games, and eventually forming a relationship with all the various elderly people, a bit of a bond. There's a bit of a story in there as well about a rival bowling green, the big fancy one that's trying to squash the little backwater town one. And it's just a nice story with a lot of very funny Australian people that you'll just see pop up for minutes at a time. It's got Judith Lucy in this as well. She's incredibly funny. Bill Hunter here is sort of the main older guy. And yeah, Crackerjack, really, really good fun. And it's very light and it's very, very warm film as well. Absolutely one of my favourite modern Australian horror films goes to Wormwood, Road of the Dead. This is such a fun It's a zombie, but it really does flow a lot in the gore aspect as well. It's not just comedy, it's a funny zombie film. It's got Mad Max style cars, which makes it a very Australian again. It's got lots of just the way that the language is used in the film is incredibly Australian. The zombie effects, all done on a budget, look incredibly impressive. The whole thing was done for, I think it was like $1 million, something along that, very cheap. The making of on this disc goes into a lot of the free support that the guys got, like free catering from fans that were just showing up to do sausage sizzles and things like that. So they really did the film cheap, but it doesn't show. It's a very professional looking film. But the standard zombie post-apocalypse kind of plot, mixing the two together, and you get the absolutely amazing Bianca in this film, who is the lead female that becomes the sort of zombie queen in a way. It's done so well and it's so much fun. Don't want to give too much away, but it's incredibly explosive, good comedy, very strong, funny actors, and lots of good fun gore. Finally, they got a sequel done. It's been showing a limited theatrical release up until now. Now it's going to have a wide release. I'm really excited to see it, but this is the first one, Wormwood. The next film frequently tops the list for the best Australian movie ever made. It does come up that often. It's certainly one of the most well thought of films, and it's definitely one of the funniest. The Castle. Again, another film, not much of an international audience. I believe it was picked up and key scenes were changed. The dialogue was changed to make it suit an American audience. Don't do that. You just want to watch the original. The whole point of The Castle is a very simple plot of this very small thinking, small town family. They're just a nice, close family. No big grand plans, no big grand desires. They just live in their house and work and have their daily lives. They get a letter telling them that their house is going to be forcibly acquired by the government. The Kerrigan family do what they can with the neighbours and the support of a friendly QC lawyer to stop this from happening. It's a very simple plot, but it is full of Australian comedy, anachronisms, little bits, little tidbits, little moments that every person in this country who would have seen the film in the 90s and grown up with this film will recognise. Things that they show on the TV when the family are watching it, things that the family and their friends are talking about happening at the current time. There is so much good stuff in this film. It is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. When I saw it in the cinema in 1997, I think it was, a particular scene had me rolling in the aisle, and that doesn't happen. Comedy films, as I said before, are very hard things for me to really enjoy. Often I don't laugh. This film kills me, and it still kills me every time now. Try and watch The Castle. It may not resonate for an international audience, but give it a try anyway. The next one is a genre classic from 1978, directed by Richard Franklin, who also did Psycho 2. This is Patrick, actually a super duper classic of Ozploitation horror cinema. It stars this very creepy looking monobrow man, who has spent the last 3 years comatose in a hospital bed. A new nurse joins the hospital staff. She quickly learns that Patrick has telekinesis powers, which have probably been brought on by the doctor that's been using him as a bit of a test case, a bit of an experiment into testing the barrier between life and death. And Patrick, probably very unhappy in his comatose state and being used as an experiment, starts using his telekinesis powers to manipulate the young nurse and affect things in her life. He doesn't move from the bed the whole time. It's some of the best acting you'll see for a person that doesn't move and never speaks. Patrick is a really, really good Australian horror film. Check it out. The next one is another 2009 horror masterpiece. This is The Loved Ones. There is some sadistic stuff in this film. Absolutely fantastic. For me, I hold this above films like Wolf Creek. I think The Loved Ones is a brilliant example on small scenario, one room torture in a Saw style, starring the absolutely fantastic Robin McLeavy here playing Princess. She is a slightly warped young girl that gets turned down for the prom date, the end of school dance, by Brent here. He simply just says, no, I'm not interested. She kidnaps him, ties him to a chair, nails him to the chair. It gets worse and worse, and along with Daddy, proceed to make this guy's life a living hell for the next 90 minutes. And it gets kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's escape attempts, that kind of thing. You could parallel some of it to Misery in the way that he's forced to be there, and some of the attempts to escape and please the captors as well as flee the captors. But really it comes down to Robin's performance in this. She is utterly demented and an absolute joy to watch. So The Loved Ones. If you haven't seen a modern Australian film in a while, Australian horror film, check this one out. And my last Australian movie to pick today is a 2013 suspense horror pre-apocalyptic film, These Final Hours. This is bleak, but it's very rewarding. The film is about the world knowing it's coming to an end. There has been an asteroid that has hit the planet. It's hit America first. It's wiped out the States. News has made it to Australia that the blast wave is coming. Prepare yourselves. There's nothing you can do. This guy on the front here decides he's going to go to the party to end all parties. He's very self-obsessed, leaves his girlfriend behind and says, no, I'm going to this party. Along the way, he saves a young girl, probably about 10, who is being attacked. He promises to take her to safety, but that gets difficult and more difficult as the film progresses. She insists on being taken to her father, which is many miles away. He reluctantly agrees, goes to the party first. It ends up being a bit of a story of redemption, and it's kind of powerful in the actions that he takes to give this little girl a happy end of life. It's really a very powerful film. And as I said, it's very bleak, so don't expect to be happy at all at the end, but it's definitely worth watching, These Final Hours. So now I'm going to move on to 8 of my favourite metal releases from Australia. Absolutely quintessential extreme metal as far as I'm concerned. And the first one here, 1997's Misery with Revel in Blasphemy. Queensland band, no longer exist anymore. But when this thing dropped, I had not heard much heavier than this at the time, particularly in the production. The track Dark Inspiration, holy hell, this is an evil, blasphemous album. Thick, crunching sound, just unhinged, demonic vocals. It is such a heavy album, and if you like incantation style music, but you're also wanting the speed of something like Angel Corpse and the overwhelming evilness of early Deicide, you might be getting somewhere like Misery. Dark, brutal death metal. Amazing stuff. Also from 1997, Melbourne band Damaged, with what they would call their own genre of hatecore. This is really a strange mix of death metal and grindcore with a bit of metalcore. The best way I could describe it, which makes complete sense for the album after this, is a bit like Brutal Truth Sounds of the Animal Kingdom. It makes sense because the album after this, they got Kevin Sharp on vocals, which for an Australian band to get the big guy with the big hat is an impressive feat. But anyway, on this album, it's unlike anything that I would have heard at the time. The next thing I would have heard that had any similarity to this would have been Dillinger Escape Plan. This is way more brutal than Dillinger Escape Plan. This is fast with some of the best drumming you'll ever hear. It's from a very famous Melbourne extreme metal drummer called Skids, Matt Skids. He has the most peppery double kicks I've ever heard. Lightning speed. He does drumming schools, of course, because he's so good. The vocals are barked out. They are fast, and I can't think of anyone else that barks their vocals out at the speed that Jamie does on this thing. Just amazing. The guitars, I wouldn't say there's melody much here. It is somewhere between sort of palm muted and chuggy. It's almost got a groove to it, but it's definitely based in grind. So, Damaged, Token, Remedies, Research. This thing was heavily promoted on Triple J radio, 3 hours of power, and I loved every second of it, so I picked it up. From the same Melbourne grind scene as Damaged, Bloodduster, and this is a band that I do know has international fandom. This is their Yeast EP from 1996, 7 tracks, 13 minutes, that's all she wrote, and they had the absolute best mix of blasting grind and groove, sort of stoner rock. It's a weird mix of chunky, groovy riffs and blast beats. Nobody else was really doing this at the time that I can think of. And the album after this one, Straight Outta Northcote, focused even more on that sort of stoner doom, southern metal vibe with blasts and grind and ridiculous lyrics and stupid song titles. They are such a fun band. They didn't take themselves seriously at all. They didn't want to be anything more than a fun project, so whenever they got high enough in appeal, or signed to a bigger label, or pressures to do another album, they would go the other direction. They tapped out eventually. Their last album was called Cult, KVLT. They made the record master. There's a video of them doing it. Record the whole album, press the LP master, and they engraved the word cult into it so that it is not playable. And all copies of it, which were not many, were not playable. That's Bloodduster. Disembowelment were definitely one of the most influential death doom, funeral doom bands that there ever existed. And to follow up Disembowelment with anything that was better was going to be very hard. Most people would say Disembowelment is still the best material. I still think that the 2012 EP from Inverloch, Dusk Subside, and the 2016 album Distance Collapsed are superior. There are not as many tracks, obviously, 3 tracks and I think 5 on here, but having half of Disembowelment and with some extra new blood from other Melbourne bands, I think the music on here is heavier, it is better produced, it has more of the doom in it, less of the grindy elements. They're still here, it still has the fast blasting. The overall performance of Inverloch is actually superior to Disembowelment. Don't shoot me. Disembowelment were fantastic. I think Inverloch is even better. I would like to see more from them. I watched them live a few years ago, just before this whole COVID pandemic, as a 5-piece on a small Sydney stage, and the sound was monumental. Crushing sound as a 5-piece. Absolutely blown away, and that's why I think Inverloch for me is the band I prefer. Disembowelment, amazing. Inverloch, outstanding. My absolute favourite brutal death metal band from Australia is Abramelin, with their self-titled release from 1995. I got this thing when I was 15 when it came out. I had never heard anything this insane. The vocals from Simon Dower on this were just abominable, absolutely brutal vocals, and he still sounds the same today. They just released an album 2 years ago and he doesn't sound any different. It's still amazing. but the tracks on here took the riff style of Suffocation and that thick sound from a band like Immolation. It is just so entwined in my upbringing at this point that I can't really be objective about it. It is the best brutal death metal album I know of. It even has a Dead Can Dance cover at the end. I didn't know who the hell Dead Can Dance were when I heard this album, but the cover is fantastic. It's a brutal cover of that song. Groove on the songs here is what really got me. The riffs are completely memorable. It goes from head banging, hair swirling, moshy parts to just brutal blasting death metal. Absolutely amazing. Obviously Repulse Records thought the same because they signed them. Century Media picked it up for the reissue about 5 or 6 years ago. It just stands the test of time. A Bremelin, self-titled, amazing. In the year 2000, I got to see this Queensland band do support tour for this EP at a small, no longer existing pub called the Iron Duke Hotel. And it was absolutely amazing. This is Astrial with Summoning the Essence of Ancient Wisdom. If Australia had their own Abigor, it would be Astrial. That is the best way to describe this band. They take the early Burzum sound, the early Abigor sound, mix it together, and it's just frenetic riffs, very emotive riffs, a little bit of dissection in there. It's scathing stuff. They've done a couple of full lengths, they did a couple of demo, another EP, but this is the one that's always stood out for me because it's got probably their best song, As Mist Befell the Ruins. It has such an addictive hook in that song, but really this whole EP is absolutely fantastic and is what I always return to. Limited 120 of limited to 500 copies. This is number 120 on Dissident Records, who also don't exist anymore, so I'm not too sure what the avenues are to get this EP, but there's plenty of other Astrial you can get and it is all good, so definitely check out this Queensland band. Without a doubt, my favourite new Australian death metal band is Golgothan Remains. I have sung the praises of this album and this band to anybody that will listen. I saw them in support of this in 2018 and I did not know who the band were. I was off there seeing, would you believe it, Blood Incantation, who had come out to tour Australia on Starspawn, which I still am amazed ever happened. But anyway, Golgothan Remains were on support. I didn't know who they were, I'd never heard a note, and I was blown away by that performance. It was Australia's answer to Immolation, even down to the way the guitarist plays on stage. Very similar mannerisms, and the way he attacks the guitar, just down picking, was just ferocious. And then I got the album. This thing absolutely slays. I've told everybody to buy this album. Many people have. I've seen the band 6 times now. They get better each time. Their last show that I saw, they started to add in new songs from the upcoming album, which is due in a couple of months, I think. I could hear some Bolzer creeping into particularly the vocal department, so that's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But on this album, Perverse Offerings to the Void, it is just dark death metal done right. Definitely check out Golgothan Remains. The last Australian band I'm going to talk about today, I've talked about many times on many other videos, and that's because it's worth me talking about them. Nazul with the EP Black Seed from 1998. This is some of the best atmospheric black metal, I guess, particularly on the first song. After the first song, less atmospheric, more straight ahead black metal, but it's got such an evil and twisted sound to it. I cannot get enough of this EP. They had an album out last year, 2021, called Okala, which was my number 1 album of 2021. But this EP, Black Seed, 4 tracks of the best black metal out of this country. The opening track, Vow of Vengeance, changed my trajectory in music. I had a very spiritual moment listening to that song in a thunderstorm, alone, outside, with headphones on. in 1999, and it's stuck with me ever since. It is a perfect song. It is an amazing EP. If all you've ever heard from Nazul is the Totem album, forget it. Everything that the band did after sounds pretty different to Totem, and it starts with this EP, Black Sea. So there you have it, 8 of my favourite Australian films, 8 of my favourite Australian metal albums. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, throw a shrimp on that Barbie, and I'll see you next time.